This is NBC Palm Springs.
In this Sunday's Desert Sun, they came looking for a better life, but it didn't quite work out that way. Now some asylum seekers decided to go back to their home country. Desert Sun reporter Rebecca Plevelin is back with us. It's good to see you.
Thank you.
This is a really tough story that I think will make a lot of people angry.
Yeah, it's a really sad story. You know, we were in Mexicali in Tijuana at the end of June interviewing people who had been, who had come to the U.S. and sought asylum in the U.S. and then were returned to Mexico to await their asylum cases. This is a Trump administration policy called Remain in Mexico. And people are staying in Mexico while a judge in the U.S. decides the outcome of their cases. And so people, you know, are waiting months and months, maybe even years. I mean, we don't know yet, I mean, it started, but they're definitely waiting months right now for their cases to be decided. And so we were meeting people who were just becoming so depressed and disillusioned that they were deciding to go home.
So did they actually get into this country and then were sent back to Mexico to wait?
Yeah, so these are people who crossed into the country without authorization, were apprehended by the Border Patrol, were often held in Border Patrol facilities for a week, 2 weeks. Many of these people had, you know, some of them at least had some traumatic experiences that they told us about in Border Patrol facilities. And then once they were released from Border Patrol, instead of being released into the U.S., which was the policy until recently, people were sent to Mexico to wait for their cases. And so people were also very surprised to find themselves in Mexico rather than in the U.S.
So they left a bad situation to begin with to try to find a better life here. And then once in Mexico, they decide now to go back to their home country. But some have waited long enough in Mexico where they had to find jobs in order to live.
That's right. So we met one family. It was a mom and dad and 3 little girls, and they had come from El Salvador. This whole thing, you know, they had crossed into the U.S., held in Border Patrol, returned to Mexicali. They were in Mexicali for about 2 months. And the father got work at a factory, but still their first hearing for their asylum case wasn't until October, I believe. And they, you know, the father just wasn't making enough money. They couldn't make ends meet. And in the end, they said, you know, like, the American dream wasn't possible. And so they had ridden on the top of a freight train, like, through Mexico to get to the U.S. And so when we met them, they were at the train station in Mexicali and preparing to hop on the side of the train to ride the train back south, back home.
What a lonely trip back.
Yeah, it's lonely, it's dangerous. You know, there's extreme temperatures, you know, there's criminal organizations along the route. It's a very dangerous route, especially for 3 little girls.
Yeah. So is there a possibility at some point that you would be able to follow somebody who did go back to Guatemala or El Salvador to find out really what happens to them?
That's a great question. You know, while we were there, we also met a mom and a son who, this low-cost Mexican airline called Volaris was offering these $1 flights for about 10 days. Migrants who had come from Guatemala and El Salvador could get on one of these flights for $1 and fly home. And so we met this mom and son who decided to fly home. And a couple days after they left, I found the boy on Facebook. And so I've been messaging with him.
Oh, good.
And I said, you know, how was your trip home? And he said, it was good, I'm home now. And you know, he said, you know, it was like from his community in Guatemala, he knew of some people who had gotten into the U.S. like they hoped, and some people who are already returning home.
Well, tough reporting, but an important story to be told.
Thank you.
Rebecca, we'll do that.